certain period of time because it explores something that people truly be delved into, and that is Baal, or Baal Stela, which they call Baal Stela for short, was a VE. Ugarit, which is Ras Shamra, served as the capital city of the second millennium in North Syria through the kingdom of the same exact name. The white limestone stela Baal was carved in low relief and comes from the Baal official temple of Baal at that exact site. Based on stylistic similarities to the Hittites, the Baal stele dates back to the Bronze Age. And we look at this, we see something interesting. The person here who's depicted doesn't look native, doesn't look like a normal human person. It looks like somebody from Egypt. And this is because the Baal prophecy does originate back in the kind of the catacombs of Egypt. This is where it comes from, interestingly. Wearing the horned crown, a marker of his domain, in the back, in the foreground. Long curls cascade down under his helmet. He wears a short skirt and a sword tucked in at the waist. His left hand holds the lance, sprouting branches at the top. So if you look closely at this depiction of Baal worship, you see that they are holding this lance. And that's interesting. Don't forget that issue here. The mace, sword, and costume suggest a war deity, while the sprouting lance suggests vegetal abundance. Well, I'm not an archaeologist, but according to archaeology, the dig sites and also the artifacts, the shrine of Baal was actually in Lebanon, and it was very, very dark most of the time, black, which is interesting. A black altar to Baal signifies just an interesting connection. There's a lot of symbols in the occult, in Druid traditions. All of them depict thrones, altars that are black like coal. The depiction is about the Canaanite origins of Baal, being a storm god. Found in the temple, this Baal stela, plus a second one to Baal Saphon, identifies the deity for the designation Temple of Baal. The early Israelites knew of Baal, such as Baal Peor, Baal Hermon, Baal Meon, and Baal Hazor, though this is not commonly taught in history. Prominent individuals, including King Ahab and the Manasseh, king of Judah, worshipped officially Baal. Ahab elevated Baal for quite a time. Baal assumed a prominent place in the local cult. There's the story, of course, of the two young warrior gods, and Yahweh fighting against Baal, who competed for supremacy across the Levant. For an example, it states in some of the original Hebrew text that Hosea refers to Yahweh's appropriation of Baal's name, and Yahweh defeats the sea, which was given as a kingdom to Baal, and he scatters Baal among the sea. Introductions to the site and literary text are provided by Marguerite Yon and Stéphane Rousseff regarding what they call Baal worship. We're going to be exploring this, so thank you. Which relates to harvests and the wrath thereof, which could lead to drought. Basis. He is sometimes depicted as a sitting bull to symbolize strength. Centered in Ugarit, where extensive texts have been uncovered, providing insights into the worship and mythology. So, always interesting. Is Baal So oftentimes we hear in in print and in the media about the different uh, problems in the world, problematic people or cult groups, shadowy groups like the globalists, the New World Order, and similar things. But we never really see, in my view and in someone else's view as well, things that are more in concrete. This isn't just something like it's a church group, it's just a random group that crosses over with Zionism, other things. We don't see people really uh, call them out, so to speak. And so, what I'm doing here for the first time in a long time, folks, is as other people are starting to call this what it is, like calling a spade, I'm pointing out here we have discovered evidence for the first time, archaeological proof in certain uh, cases and contexts here, that who these people are is they are essentially the cult of Baal, aka the cult of Baal, which is interesting because this is something that is not new, and many of the people who are in leadership positions or in certain positions of society, such as in the United Kingdom, and so on, have this sort of manuscript, this book, as it were. And the cult of Baal goes back a long time. People talk about things like there is some strange activities that have happened in Turkey, in the year 1000 AD. And I'm sure there is, which crosses over with this to some degree. But this analogy here, what we're talking about here, is based on a real book with real chapters, with real occult symbolism that traces back through our history to ancient Egypt. In other words, the Canaanites of Egypt, who have not really anything to do with, the Hebrews or other similar real key issues of the Middle East, but rather they are the Egyptian, Phoenician members of Canaan who created this, which is known as the cult, as they call it. Many, many other types of people would not not really in the public eye, but I suppose secretly join their group or join, as it were, their theology for this type of activity that they do. And we've seen here, in the archaeology of it, that these books are very powerful and the symbols in them are equally powerful. Um, it speaks, for one example here, that these priests, as they call them, the priests of Baal, who also got the people of Jerusalem to finally start following this deity, they knew that they were calling upon a god of storms or a god of the other region, the afterworld, or the god of storms, fertility, and causing storms. That's essentially what Baal, or Baal, in other words, what Baal is as a structure. It is a religion that is based upon the worship of a specific entity that goes back thousands of years, that they are still not really hiding it that well, that they are still worshiping this today. And in the region of Canaan and so on. says Baal is the storm god that ruled the area of the Mesopotamia. Worship of Baal was common in the region all across the Levant for thousands of years. The deities follow these archetypes, and these include the worship of Greek, Roman, and other. Because when they're talking about Phoenician, they're talking about actual Egyptians. The original people in Egypt. It says all three Abrahamic religions are founded on Baal's provenance. This is what it claims in this book. It's the book about Baal and so on. The god of Ashtaroth and similar. And they even mention, Baphomet in certain areas here. These are related to Baal, Baal's teachings, or Baalism, as they call it. Every mystery school or knowledge is traced back to Baal, especially things such as the Kabbalah. So look, they're basically admitting here, okay, that the Kabbalah and similar books, especially books in Islam, because Islam is very, very famous for working, out of Egypt and so on. Well, they were not created just by, somebody going into a conference somewhere for Judaism or anything similar. These go back, thousands of years to this whole book, the worship of this deity known as Baal. States as a result of their service to self, infighting and betrayal is rampant among adherents to the group who worships Baal. Still, they manage to recognize enough to always stay on the same side and keep the agenda moving forward. They seek to be gods of a new world, just as they were during the time of the Levant. So again, notice we're not really sugarcoating things that much here, because we have here historical records. This Book of Baal, which is very much connected to these archives, these occult symbols, that lays it out and talks about how the monotheistic religions were kind of sister in certain ways to the worship of this deity, the worship of Baal. They worship a upside down symbol, it says, that's an Egyptian symbol. So if you see the eye of Horus, if you see the eye that's seen in the Pantheon and things like that, well, I mean, if you see symbols, folks, that are related to that and originate really in ancient Egypt, you have to call a spade a spade. This is definitely Baal worship. It says that they practice the Babylonian mystery school of the occult, the wisdom for Ashtaroth, and similar. It says they are able to form tightly knit networks among each other because it's fairly simple when they can connect to other people who have a book, related to the deity known as Baal. And many of them have this book that is connected to Baal worship or the deity known as Baal, which makes understanding how they maneuver, the ways that they do things, the occult symbols we see in the halls of government at certain times and other things, much easier to understand and realize exactly who they are and how Egypt has really been doing some interesting things and kind of ruling our world for a long time. This book is nothing new. Talks about the Sephiroth map mirror. So very, very fascinating. Um, and I'll be speaking about that by showing you some of these symbols that are from Egypt. There are the also followers in Israel who especially worship Baal, but they may do so um, under some kind of delusion as well, is possible too. And they are not the main proponents of this. This is something that originates in Egypt. It has gone on for as long as they have been around, and they have continually brought more followers, especially from Jerusalem and similar, to be a part of their group. And they are of the line of Ishtar, the line of the Pharaoh, so on. And it is not an unusual or unknown deity. This is not, something that the churches can just dismiss and say that is a part of a a demonic possession or something else. This has very, very clear, concrete archaeological roots in Baal worship. And this group, as they call it, this group that really, really is a strong proponent of kind of the worship of the storms and the storms of Baal, really, really crosses over a lot with with Islam, with different parts of the Islam and different parts of the tradition there of the Levant. They are not new. They are thousands of years old, and this is what we are here to expose to you, because this is what it appears Epstein was directly connected with, and we have some very, very specific archaeological type of evidence of that. And how this can relate to events we see in our world is powerful, because it shows that the people who are more occult from Syria, especially from there and similar places, going back into the Levant of Egypt, are still actually, not sometimes, they are still actively promoting and creating Baal artifacts or areas where they can worship this deity, which is known for sacrifice of animals, sometimes sacrifice of other victims as well. And that they are continuing to push this in certain, moderate Islamic areas and other parts of Jerusalem, that they actually want to foment something there that's very much related to the customs and the history of Baal. What we see here is, as much as they wanted to hide it, the the reality of the elites and so on is nothing new under the sun. This is definitely all the hallmarks of the traditions of those who worship and, well, create sacrifices, just be real about deity known as Baal. And we're going to explore that with real facts and real insights that are interesting about this group. Oh, not, to make claims that cannot really be researched. We have here the worship of Baal across the Levant. This is from the History Channel's own archives. So interestingly, they admit, the truth about this. Long before monotheistic faiths rose in Levant, across Syria, Israel, and Palestine. It was a complex and polytheistic tradition. At its core, the religious landscape stood Baal, the storm god whose thunderous voice commanded fear and devotion across all Canaanite regions. The name Baal was a title, and different regions worshipped local versions of Baal, including Baal Hadad. So they are indirectly admitting here on a website that's tied to your own history channel, okay, that Baphomet and other similar things and so-called occult, symbols and beasts are all insignia or connected links directly to Baal. They are just other versions of the entity known as Baal. They called it Baal Hadad. It can control rain, lightning, wind, and the agriculture world. He was portrayed to wield a thunderbolt. In the Ugaritic text, which, by the way, it's kind of something that goes back to Egypt again. It's not surprising. Anyway, ancient writings discovered Ras Shamra of Syria. Baal emerges as a central divine figure. So they don't see him as evil. They've never seen him as really that much of an issue. You will find followers of this group that talk about Baal. They believe that there's a creator, they just believe that Baal goes above anything to do with maybe the divine or the creator's desires or wishes. And what's interesting about that is it puts life in a different context. Stated Baal would battle Yam of the chaos world, and he would battle Mot, and he would battle the cycles of death and so on in the Levant. The battle between Baal and Mot was symbolic for nature. So occult groups admit all the time that they derive a lot of their feeling and maybe the curses, maybe the other types of magic, the magic seals that they speak about in this book, comes from the issues of Baal, Baal Hadad or Baal worship. That's not surprising. And that can only be clear to someone when they just open this up. They study this proof, this evidence that's out here. The power over the skies. Worship of Baal created security for everyone in the Levant. As Phoenician, otherwise known as Egyptian types, these traders expanded as merchants. They would expand the maritime empire for Baal's conquering of the region. Cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Carthage erected temples only for Baal and Baal Hadad. Baal merged with other deities to be Baal Haman. And Haman is a name that's from ancient Egypt too. So now we're talking about something people can physically prove. And that's interesting, to see that. Baal and their rituals would include offerings of incense, grain, animals, and sometimes even humans at certain times. And they were done as sacrifices for their gods. It's a requirement to sacrifice these things to the deities that surround Baal. Archaeological sites like the Tophet sanctuary of Carthage contain urns where Baal was worshipped religiously. It appears frequently in the Hebrew Bible always as having to be demolished when they had to demolish Jerusalem after Jerusalem fell back into following these people and actually trying to worship this pagan deity. Although Baal declined, his imprint survives all of our cultural wars. So basically they're saying this many years later, Baal worship is celebrated. It is practiced, not in secret, in public, in certain cases, because people know uh, what this is. In certain places, they like to play with magical tarot cards, or they like to play with just simple types of instruments, perhaps playing cards, perhaps other things. And they are related to the occult symbolism of this deity known as Baal. And you are going to see more, about what it means, and proof of what that is. You know, not everything, but definitely proof of what it means, of why they have a reverence for this ancient god of storms known as Baal. You will find that here. And you will be encouraged to keep spreading the information out there, because people need to know. But this is still very, very traditional in our society today, that people really revere the entity, and they don't hide it. They celebrate that they have Baal back in operation in certain parts of our world. In Europe, we've seen that as well in recent times. So very, very interesting. And just remember, there's more to explore. So therefore, we now have context. That's historical context, because it's important to base things upon archives and images, upon history, historical record. And we don't have assumptions, therefore. It states the Nabatean inscription that predates Islam still exists, where it is written in an epitaph. The inscription of the image used to depict Baal was in the image of a cornelian with a golden hand that was broken. The pagan Arab population was said to have consulted Hubal by divination. The deities mentioned by name in the Quran were Allah and Manat. They belonged to the Thaqif tribe, a settlement of Mecca. When Muhammad destroyed idols in Mecca, the demise of this one cost the worshippers everything. A certain Amar Alui was said to have set up the image of Al-Uzza and Nakla in a village in relation to Mecca. The same Amir set up an image of Murat al-Khala, Chaldea, on the shore of the Red Sea, and pilgrims to Mecca, which revered the image, and that is related to the entity or the deity Baal. Quran ridicules the idea that Allah would have any offspring. Quran recognizes the one and only Lord of worlds. So it recognizes the Lord of worlds, Lord of storms, they allege. And we look at that, and we look at what they talk about in the inscriptions with Baal, and we see something, very interesting there. On another occasion, it states they swear their oaths to this entity, the deity. It appears the acknowledgement of one supreme being and ruler. It is known in the Syria text to be Allah, and is thought it may have derived from Elohim. It's possible the name came from the Arabs who reside there today. Others have suggested that the name derived from the Allah known as the God. There is nothing in pre-Islamic history to give credence to the idea. However, there is a lot areas in the text that refer to the traditions, the traditions of the storms, the traditions of Baal. So, what we notice here that's important, it says the Quran pays more attention to Judaism than Christianity. There were a number of tribes that were associated with Mecca at the time. Of course, this is kind of their interpretation because we know about the storm god. The context and history of the storm god is going back, several thousand years. This is not a new entity with the storm god, as they refer to it as Baal, and they claim that this goes back to, the people of ancient Egypt, and it's not surprising to some who study this that it does essentially originate in Egypt, and then it was brought over to these other regions and brought especially into Israel, Jerusalem, and places like that. But it originates in these arenas, and it appears to be the case. It says he boldly attacked these beliefs, showing that they did not come from the sky but came from earth, of flesh and blood like other humans. The Monophysite sect was established here. It was prevalent all throughout Egypt and also the Syrian force. When Muhammad would come across it later. So some are saying that Islam derives from Baal and so on. And I don't know. I don't want to put a lot of assumptions, out there, because the entity and the temple of Baal, Baal goes back before Islamic traditions and other things. It goes back many, many thousands of years in the context of what they were worshiping in Egypt. And I believe that's a troubling, issue. I think that proves that there's some aspect, of course, of Islam, in particular, in the Kaaba, that would cross over with Baal, with the entity known as Baal. But it predates, those religions. This is a very old, and so when we see that, and they talk about it in the Quran, then we see why we have the Zionist types in Jerusalem and similar, who have fallen into the worship of this deity, and fallen in with this same crowd, and how that can greatly impact our world. I think it's important to recognize that Baal worship is still, and it's very, very common in the Middle East, and that what we are witnessing, according to this answeringislam.org and similar areas that bring up the photographs from these Islamic books and these texts, manuscripts that are related to the Book of Baal, and Ashtaroth and so on, that these same things are occurring today, and that these same things are still occurring today the way they occurred in 1000 BC, thousands of years ago, because they are still doing the same things. So, in essence, they 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 would tend to argue that this is not occurring today, but still very common today, and they are still doing the same things, as we know, because this originates with the Phoenician uh, people, the Phoenicians of ancient Egypt. This was created by Egypt, in essence, explaining why the Israelite and these other groups always would fall into kind of this idolatry, maybe to follow after them. But there's the upside down Ankh. There's the many different symbols in certain iterations of Islam. There's many other interesting symbols that relate to the storm, and it would tend to be something that you would think people would commonly discuss today, because when you would make a pact with Baal, you have to sacrifice. So people who may not be aware uh, of the context, there is a requirement when you sign any agreement with the deity Baal, um, because it has its own occult ties to it. It's very occult. That when you sign anything with the deity Baal, you have to give it sacrifices. You don't have a choice, um, and you have to offer these sacrifices to have the specific material gain or gain from the world that you wish to get, and that includes sacrifice of animals, sacrifice of people in certain cases, but sacrifices. You are required to make those sacrifices. This is why it was always, kind of organized and controlled by, well, Egypt. This is why we see it a lot, the worship of this entity or this deity in Dubai, in Bahrain, and similar, today, because it's not something that ever changed. And we hear about all these shadowy terms that are out there, but when we look at it in the plain and simple terms, this is not something that ever changed. According to the historical record, they are still worshiping and working with Baal, and they're still getting the Israelites in certain cases, and these other people and the people in the UK to do the same. And in that context, there is nothing new, you know, and this would explain a lot about what occurs in our world. But I just felt that that was interesting. You can see where Jeff Epstein, how his kind of nature of doing things, where it came from, his apostate type of choices, why he chose to join kind of this group and be a part of kind of uh, a specific group under Islam and things like that, and why this is so important just to know about this information today. This is in the historical record. This is not new. This has been going on for thousands of years. And if these same exact people from that lineage of Egypt, have brought the Rothschilds and others into it also over time, then they are doing the same things, of course. To why the crescent moon is a major symbol over there. That would explain a lot of things that go on in our world, and and why Muhammad, I guess, and other later leaders of Islam didn't want to see that deity, and so they tried to they tried to get rid of any shrines to Baal, and they tried to get rid of it, and so that's a very important uh, you know issue to have awareness of, and so thank you again for coming on this journey, and there's always more to explore. The Ugarit, or the Ugar, right, as they call it, were also linked to Egypt of heritage or same kind of practices related to Baal today. That would, if that's proven to be true, and it would certainly show why the events that occur in our world seem to always unfold the same way. Explains a lot, and explains a lot that goes on in many places, and in Qatar really explains a lot. So thank you. So the secrets of the Temple of Baal, aka Temple of Baal, is interesting. It says, while many well-known ancient rituals have been extensively documented, such as those in Egyptian lore and Greek mythology, and have been extensively studied since then, there are lesser-known mystery rituals that have not been documented. Study ties the Eastern Ugaritic traditions of civilization with the deity known as Baal. Now, this was found in their historical archaeology, archaeology digging. So this is historical fact. So we're talking about the Ugaritic civilization as an official symbol or an official mascot. The Baal rituals, the feast for Baal, Baal and the prophet, and the prophets, and so forth. So yes, we know that this has to be true because the Phoenician, or Phoenicians, meaning the original, actually invented a number of these deities that would tend to include the Levant, so the Levant god known as Baal. And that's what's interesting. The Ugaritic civilization flourished in the last Bronze Age for many millennia in the region of Syria. The city-state of Ugarit, known for its significant international trade and cultural exchange, was a linchpin for these denominations. Baal, the chief deity of the Ugaritic pantheon, held a central role in their religious belief. Often depicted as a storm and fertility god for storms and the creation and instigation of storms, Baal was considered to have power over the natural elements and much of the elements of the earth, as seen in most New Age type of traditions. It continues. The Baal rituals would go through a cycle every season. The texts found in the Baal cycle shed light on the rituals performed by the Ugaritic people to gain Baal, the god of storm, and their favor for the coming year. So to create more uh, natural order or more increase, they would worship and sign a pact with this entity, with this deity known as Baal. Now, it states that the myth of Baal depicted recounts the battle known as the Baal and Yam, where they would fight in the sky for being able to return more uh, abundance or more increase, in other words, to all the people. So it's very important. We are seeing the fact that the symbols of Baal, in the Temple of Baal or Temple of Baal are very real. Manuscript considered to be uh, Baal in essence, and it's connected to other occult uh, sources that are probably connected to that are probably connected to the devil or connected to idols. But this is just very, very plain and factual. This talks about Baal as a whole, as an entity, and it makes no mistake about the fact that, you know, it's these same rituals have existed for thousands of years. And so the original creator of this deity or of the worship ceremony that would come to congratulate this is Egypt. And in essence, that means the Pharaoh, the Canaanite pharaohs kind of created this, and so that they would bring it into the land of Israel and other places is not surprising. What is surprising is that Baal as a deity never really went away. And so today we can see that with Epstein, we can see that with similar interesting figures on the public stage. And I've just shown you kind of some interesting things from one of the chapters of the book. So we know that book is very real. The worship of this deity was very, very common, and that they are doing it. They are doing it today. They are doing it across different denominations of Islam. Now they claim that because the Mecca or the Medina, the Mecca that's discussed in the specific Socratic text or religious text of Islam is the same as the dome that's in Jerusalem, or basically Mecca in essence is supposed to mean Jerusalem, that the fundamentals of the Islamic bloc are based upon the same worship ceremony of Baal. Now, that may or may not be true. I don't know, and unless people are studying that archaeology very closely, I don't think we can. Is at least one of the later iterations of Islam. I think it was, the advanced Islamic tradition that came, after the original Islam came about, is definitely linked to the storm god. Baal is linked to the Levant, and is probably based upon, because of what they're saying in this manuscript, is probably based upon Baal, as a whole. Now that would tend to make sense, but what is unusual is these same priests or these same leaders of Baal, and people don't discuss what they do enough, because these people, well, I would say they're pretty dangerous because of what I've seen. They're very likely unaware of that they should definitely know. There should be more of a spectacle as far as public knowledge, is that if you are a follower of Baal, wherever you come from, whether it's one of these people who were underneath Epstein, I guess, who were, somewhat Jewish in some sense or something like that, right? If you are following it, and that's what they call it, the deity, and you are not particularly a fan of Baal and so forth, you are still required by the covenant that you actually sign with the Temple of Baal or the Temple of Baal to sacrifice things to please the gods. and to do so over the Creator's perhaps wishes, because you are required by some kind of higher covenant. They call it a higher law that you sign when you sign with the temple of Baal. And what it means is you are required to sacrifice animals. You are required to sacrifice people in certain cases. You are required to sacrifice these things to actually receive favor and acknowledgement from Baal. And so the various denominations and iterations of the kind of occult here with people that is the oath that you end up, because in the Ugaritic text, which speaks about the foundation, you know, of worship of the Levant and worship of Baal, it definitely specifies you have to do these sacrifices. And if you do not conform to the sacrifices and creating these sacrifices, you are no longer considered a part of their pantheon. They call it a pantheon. That's interesting because the pantheon is kind of what originates, of course, in the original lands of Egypt. So they have the Ankh and they have these Egyptian symbols because they are telling you what's on the wall that you will be required to worship by instituting these sacrifices. And if you do not, they will come for you. Baal worship is very, very simple and distinct. They see the understanding of the pantheon, of Baal as being above God's wishes, and they also, of course, hold God in esteem. And you are required to adhere to that covenant. Now, most people who are, especially in Israel and places like this, are unaware that that is a vow that you take whenever you sign any kind of contract or any kind of document related to Baal, to the storm god known as Baal. Allegedly, you cannot actually cancel that contract, dealing with the god of Baal, except through very specific conditions. So once you are signed and take a vow Baal to the throne of Baal, you cannot break that covenant. You cannot get out of that covenant that you sign with having to do those sacrifices, except through very, very specific uh, protocols, apparently. And most people would never be aware of this. And they would not understand this because they assume that the things that deal with the Levant and so forth are just dealing with uh, the devil or similar things. But this is actually dealing with this physical deity known as Baal. And it's gone on for, well, so many centuries that people definitely need the process works, of how this works, and of why it's a serious topic people should discuss. Thank you. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that I can go all out on this. We can go all out on this for a good bit here because many of you are uh, going to not be a part of those events, or may not have already kind of been raptured from among some of the most serious issues and events that will occur in the world, and so on. Or you may be having different experiences and just experiencing what occurs now in our modern era in a very different way. In any case, this is what it exposed and what it exposes. This is the proof of what they are referring to, what they talk about in the book of Baal, the book of Baal, or cult of Baal, which most will just say is the cult of Baal. They are the hand signals of Baphomet as well as Baal. Notice the signals are not opposed to one another. They are not lopsided. They are very much in the same spirit of each other. They are the same symbols. So what you are seeing here is the hand signals essentially of Baal. The hand signals of one hand points up while the other points down, forming a triangle with the hand as an occult symbol for both Baphomet and Baal, both of whom carry symbolic histories that cross each other. And understanding the connection requires delving into the representation and symbols of the meanings of the figures, including Baal. Baphomet appeared across the Levant to a French occultist, and he was the symbol of duality and balance, which also derives from the original Canaanite traditions of Baal. Ancient representation. Baal is the ancient deity from the Near East pantheon, primarily worshipped in the Canaanite and Phoenician cultures. So right there they are admitting it comes from Egypt. So these people who are at the top of this are just simply Egyptian, the Egyptian culture. And then there are also many, many people from Israel and from kind of that Zionist, more Jewish faith as well, who come into it later. But they do not, they do not foment it. This is created through Egypt, which brings it into Jordan, which brings it into Israel, which has done this for many centuries, interestingly. So these people here, who are part of the symbolism of balance, resonance, and storms, and the symbols that have been brought to the Middle East, they are going to be who are behind this new kind of unified religion, so to speak. They're not like random church groups. These are not like just, a group of politicians in Israel. These are the cult members of Baal. They have these books that relate directly to Baal, and they bring kind of the symbols, the cards, the things with them to do invocations. That's very common. They serve as conduits to invoke the balancing of energy. So in their eyes, they're not doing anything unusual. They see it as balancing energy. They have a different interpretation. Um, and it is very occult in nature. Certainly, the ones who come out of Jerusalem who follow this very real group, this stationary group that's existed for thousands of years, they are definitely of the synagogue of evil, as it says in the Gnostic Bible, and in that literature speaks about those who say they are Jewish or who are not, etc. That would be this interesting um, this interesting pantheon of people, but they are a minority. And historically, they have been a minority because they are brought into this, they're brought into this by the same exact people who are doing this today. Is very, very pagan I suppose you could say in its origins, and it is pagan today because it does come from ancient Egypt, which has been mentioned since beginning this here. It says the reverse ritual. In many occult traditions, the rituals will deliberate the inversion of symbols. So the upside down ankh that's seen in all types of Baal ceremonies, okay, that originates in Egypt, dealing with the tree of life and so on. So this is less of uh, maybe something that Israel directly created, and is more of what the people who are part of Egypt created. Um, and keep in mind, this has been something that's been around for thousands of years. So it makes sense that they brought it to these different cultures. And basically, it is flooding the world, and they use the occult symbols that you see here. So people would wonder where the Eye of Horus comes from, or similar things. Well, again, it's pretty much self-explanatory here, and it more or less comes from the original, you know, history of Cleopatra. So we're talking about more of what goes on in the original belief systems of Cleopatra and similar things like this, and less of what the other religious symbols are, or what you might call, um, you know, Zionism, or others, that come from that, context. So this is some would consider this because it's controlled by magicians. Some would consider the Book of Baal, groups of Baal who worship this deity, to be the official religion of ancient Egypt, and it could be seen that way because it was created by the Phoenicians. Phoenicians, do go back to ancient Egypt, or they go back to the origins of Egypt, so that's possible as well. In any case, this is now a very, very common religion across that area, Mesopotamia, Jordan, Israel included, Lebanon, and they are doing this. Yeah, we see countless historical examples of this. We see it in the archaeology, we see it in what they dug up. So they are doing this. So very interesting. And this explains a lot that goes on in the world. When you see the star, they have like kind of a pointed star. That also comes from the the nature of this uh, group of Baal worship, or Baal worshippers, and Baal itself. This goes back to the origins of the Levant, and of Egypt. So it could be, I don't know, because there's still people researching it, but it could be the same exact things that were done in essence in the pyramid uh, areas are being done everywhere again, because there's nothing new. So they're being done now by these people who follow Baal, and they are worshiping at the deity to be able to have these specific magical invocations. This gives them supernatural abilities, is what they claim. Gives them new visions and new science. All of these things through this group. It's practiced very commonly by magicians, and it's been practiced by kind of wizards and people like that, or magicians specifically, for thousands of years. And so, because of that, this explains an awful lot, um, folks, of what you are seeing if you are looking at, well, the history of the Middle East and definitely what's happening in the end times. So, thank you. This is very, very, very key and vital stuff. Now, the book that they call, the manuscript of Baal and so on, they consider it an occult type of book, a book with occult knowledge or something. But they have physical examples of this out there, that you could buy it. And so I'm going to be exploring some of the interesting information that's on the top of the, manual. It's kind of on the top of the cover. So you can see that it isn't, exaggerated. It's what they are always in favor of. They follow this. Apparently, they've followed this for, many, many generations. This isn't something that they only follow in America, or in the UK. This is something that's been followed in many, many areas for a very long time, and it makes sense that people are starting to discover this. So thank you.